Hello world, I'm your host for this wrap of some of the best talks and coolest speakers at PG Connects London, the Global Games Conference. This time around, I catch up with two speakers during the event who were part of the standing room only AI track of talks, and you will find out why if you listen in, because we welcome Guy Gadney, co-founder and CEO of Charisma. We've had him on the show before. There's a reason why we have him on again. And Harry Holmwood, CEO of Magicave. So listen, learn, and love this episode just as I do. Guy, it's fantastic because here we are. It's almost a year to the day since you launched that amazing game that we talked about on Pocket Gamer on the podcast. It's a great show, great track, a lot of ideas. How are you digesting this?
Well, I think the show here looks like it's going to break records, so that's really exciting among the number of people here. I think everything I've seen so far is that AI is infusing throughout everything. It's like the topic of conversation, as it has been for the last 12 months anyway, really since ChatGPT at the end of 2022. So we're excited. You know, the work we've been doing, I think, is starting to be recognized. The philosophies we put into the technology we're doing is starting to be recognized. And the impact of it on the games industry is starting to really be felt, I think, this year, which is a good place to be.
It's also a deeper thought about AI. It's thinking about, it's great to be creative, which you obviously were when we were chatting before with Electric Sheep, which is an amazing concept because it will never be there again. When you view it, that's it. This is the reality that's the first and last time you'll experience it like that.
Yeah, totally. And I think you know what, that's one of the key things on the panel I was just talking on that I think is going to be the key for 2024 and 2025 is when people start to use AI, they evolve it from being something that is accelerating their pipeline, what they currently do, whether it's creating a background asset or creating a character or whatever, into real time. In other words, where that world or those characters or the dialogue is being generated with input from the player in real time. And that's what we did with Project Electric Sheep, was to say, tell it your dream and we'll generate the buildings, the weather system, the characters, all of this in real time. And that it changes the way you look at it, because I think there is an element then of designing not for every potential option, every potential nook and cranny that exists in a game, and more just setting the rules for the game and saying, okay, now with a little bit of improvisation from AI, what can we do? How can we make that so it's unique to you as a player?
When it becomes that fundamental to the game, then you start to have this conversation that I'm hearing a lot as well as to, well, what do you do? Is it a bit on top of the concept, or do you start to literally bake AI in from the start? How are you, or how should a company be designing for AI?
Well, you mentioned baking, and we went off on a tangent on the panel a little bit about cooking and all of this, in the sense that you're right. You can say it's like cooking with eggs. Either you sort of use it as a glaze on something you're already making, or you're making an omelette. And I think the key for me is that we, with everything to do with AI right now, it's just about thinking about it. It's about pausing for a second and saying, why do I want to do this? Is it going to make the game better? Is it going to make our players like it more? Is it going to make it more unique? Ethically, am I doing the right thing? Am I not just leaping in too fast? Because I think there is 2023 was very much a leap in, get your feet wet. And now we need to, I think 2024 is a moment of reflection as laws start to come in, as the issues start to arise on it. And the people who properly think about it, I think will survive, and they're the ones who will have the successes.
And we are starting to think more deeply about it, because the question is more and more, and in the case of your own game as well, with Electric Sheep, I don't want to understand only what is it and where did you get your inspiration from. I want to know, what were the prompts? What made this possible? And And having your own data set, I'm hearing, absolutely essential. Is it that way? What do games companies need to understand as a fundamental must as they get more and more involved in 2024? It's almost like own your data, record your prompts, be ready to show where you got your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, very much all of those you just said. And again, it goes back to just thinking to having someone in the organization that knows the AI landscape, knows what the mechanisms of AI are, what the foundation technology is, what the content that is used to train it is, and then what content is used to fine tune it to very different processes, and understanding it a little bit more. And I think that's where we're going to start to see some real innovations. Is as people understand the new mechanisms that exist, what can they do with it? And that's exciting. So I think there's going to be a sort of almost like a next creative, chapter that will come through in 24 and 25 as people start to get to grips with these tools, these creative tools, and use them for their games.
So, I am enthusiastic. I love this. That's why I came to you and said, Guy, we need to chat because you're inspiring. But it is going to be a minefield in 2024 as well.
In a lot of ways, 2024 is when certain, there's almost like an analogy, the water's receding and we're starting to see what was on the floor of the surface, after the innovations in 23. There was a lot of hype in 22 and 23 about this, a lot of overinflated valuations. Those are pulling back. And I think, 23 again there was a lot of investment around foundation models in technology, foundation technology. My sense is that 24 will be more around the application layer on top that sits on top of AI. And there are minefields, but like, anyone who's walking through a minefield, the first thing to do is again, look, don't just run across and hope. Think about it a little bit more. And like I was saying, I think there's the angle of looking and thinking about why you would want to do it and how it's going to make a better game and how it may revolutionize your entertainment experience is probably the best one to do. Keep it fun, but be aware also of the shifting sands,
And you say keep it fun, but it's also a business. And you went through quite a lot to launch Electric Sheep. I mean, you nearly didn't make it. And then you had to switch your thoughts around where to launch it. What's a little bit of advice maybe to developers who are saying, yes, I really want to do this. I am prepared. Guy has prepared me with his advice. I'm ready to grasp it, but there are going to be some issues, how to handle them, how to anticipate them.
Well, I think you're dead right. That when we were working this space very early on, there were no guidelines. There were no people we could contact in Valve and in Epic who understood exactly what their strategy was, what their policy was, and could guarantee that we would be able to launch an AI-driven game on their platform. That has changed, and I think the market is now more stable. My first top tip would be engage with that platform that you want to launch it onto, or the publisher you're working with, and understand what their guidelines are, because you're going to need to make sure that you conform to those. And the last thing you want is to finish a game, be ready for launch, and then discover that something's, infringing a particular data set, copyright requirements or whatever. I think there is a very fast catch up that's being played by governments, by publishers, by technologies to start to put in place frameworks around the world. But as we talked a little bit about on the panel, every country has different laws. So what is right for the UK may not be right for the US, which may not be right for Europe or the Middle East or Asia or whatever. So I think there is again, it goes back to just understanding and do a little bit of research about where you're going to put your title and how it comes to life. I mean, we're barely a year in. And look how far we've come. And my sense always is that if you're looking ahead to 2030, really only 6 years away, where we are now, we're only probably about 2% of where we're going to be in 2030. We're just at the beginning of the journey. So there's so much more to keep across. But for the creatives out there, and indeed the business strategists, I think just to know where you want to head, what your vision is, hold that and don't let it be diluted by bright, shiny things. Don't be distracted by the bright, shiny things. Hold what the idea is, whether it's a business strategy or whether it's a creative concept, and then question why you're using AI as part of it. Maybe better, but you may decide not to, and that's also fine.
Now I know why I said, yes, Guy's there, have to go up and meet him in person, for real. You are a pioneer for me. I really am. I'm a bit of a fan, and love to have your thoughts in closing on what has you very excited, either what's in your own pipeline or what you've been hearing about. There's got to be some great title, something I was hearing a lot about, getting into narrative and AI and narrative, character, music. Sky's the limit. What are you excited about, Guy?
Well, I think for me, it's always been story. How do you tell a story? And we've heard a little bit today already from people who are saying they want to look at ChatGPT and how it can create a story. My advice at the moment is try it, because it does not work. It's not a good story. Story is a craft. It's an artwork. And I think it's very much the way in which I was saying earlier on about deploying it in certain areas. AI is very good at improvisation, to improv something where, like, the spine of the story here is that I was on a panel at Pocket Gamer Connect. The improv is that you and I met and are now doing this interview. So I'm now talking about something else. Those improv moments, I think, are where AI can really fundamentally change the art of storytelling. So I think what we'll see is the growth of characters again in games, emotional characters, games that really make us feel things, and also games and AI starting to feed into other media, into film, into TV, into literature, all of the other things. And all of those industries outside of the video games at the moment are deep in conversation about the impact of it. It's not just games. We've seen the writer's strike, we've seen actor strike in the US in 2023. Those issues, that strike has been resolved, but the issues are still there. So there's still more work to be done. But really exciting, I think, to see the application of creativity to AI. Not AI to creativity, but creativity to AI. That's the key. That's where we as humans are best. And the moment that starts to happen, I think we're going to see some just astonishingly cool stuff.
How can that be a bad thing?
No.
You've got us excited. Creativity to AI, it puts us back in control.
Yep.
It's a very good feeling. And Guy, I have to say, well worth it. I'm so glad we could connect at Pocket Gamer Connect. How about that? No pun intended. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Harry, I had to catch up with you because your talk was like sitting literally in a pew. No one was leaving. Everyone was sitting very well behaved, and everyone was absorbing it like a sponge. So tell me, first of all, Magicave, a little bit about it and a little bit about how that connects and inspires you for your talk.
Cool. Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. So Magicave is a company that's set up to build what we call a digital hobby. So kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer, that kind of thing, but digital. So with digital dice, digital characters, digital tiles that you can build worlds out of. And we want those worlds and those characters to become richer over time. So, every battle that you fight, everyone you meet, all of these things kind of become part of your identity or your character's identity or your world's identity. And we're right at the beginning with that. We're using a lot of interesting new tech. We're using a lot of procedural generation stuff that you might have seen in previous games, but kind of sprinkling on top of that some AI stuff that kind of we think helps to bring it to life. So every day you'll have a new world will be generated and everyone can play together in that world, which I think is kind of, I like that because it goes a little bit back to kind of how TV used to be when I was a kid. We'd all watch the same thing at the same time. And we've moved away from that into this non-linear world. But what you lose is that kind of, we're all doing this together. That I've just been experiencing this with my family and friends because I've got into a TV show called The Traitors. And it's the first time in ages that, we have to watch that at 9:00 at night. We have to watch it. We have to look at our Twitter and see what's happening now. And that discussion of, everyone being in the same thing at the same time is cool. And even games like Wordle do this, right? It's like, have you played today's Wordle? And so we love the idea of generating new things every day, but as a tiny company, we cannot build a new world every day, and we certainly can't build a new world for every person every day. So that's where we've been looking into using AI to help us to do that, to build the stories in those worlds, to flesh out the characters in those worlds. And that's kind of what the talk was about. Some of the experiments that we did inside and outside of that game. We created a virtual narrator with an actor from The Witcher who kind of talks you through that. And I also wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the ethical implications of some of this stuff, because, with good reason, people can be a little bit scared of AI. It is a huge change, and that change has only just started. So that was one of the other things I was really keen to talk about in the talk, is we're trying to take an ethical approach to these things. We don't want to be the bad guys, but at the same time, we don't want to completely hide away from what is a really exciting technology.
What I also like about that is that AI is an element of the game. So you're still very creative, but AI is the element. In this case, it's also the voice, some of the narrative, some of the storytelling, but I'm still creating the story. How did you sort of sprinkle AI on top, as you say?
So the first thing we've done, we've created this, we called it a combat test. The game isn't going to be ready for a long time, but we wanted to sort of test out some combat mechanics and also test out the first phase of this kind of AI generation. And so what that does is the narrator kind of talks you through what you're going to see in today's dungeon. And we call it a meta story. So we're creating the dungeon really not using that much AI. It's using kind of procedural generation systems that you might see in, super complicated games like Dwarf Fortress or whatever. They're building these incredibly deep worlds. But what AI allows us to do is then say, okay, here's the story of this world that we've maybe generated procedurally rather than with AI. But then let's use this to turn this into a really interesting narrative. So it's interesting to listen to. It doesn't sound the same over and over again. If you're playing a game, even a game with a huge audio budget, there's a limited number of sound files that have been created. And eventually, you start hearing the football commentator saying the same thing he said yesterday, and it pulls you out of that world. So we wanted this thing to feel completely organic, completely real. And so, AI allows us to kind of sprinkle that. So we take what we call meta stories, which is the kind of the data version of the story, the data version of the world, the data version of the personality of a character. And then we use a large language model that we've trained with our writers to sort of create an in-house style. And then we turn that into English. And then we put that into a voice model, which we've trained with our voice actor, Tom Canton, who's an actor from The Witcher. And that then creates this really, really compelling narrative that just brings the game to life.
And there's also a lot in there about exactly that. You've used your models, you've used your data sets, and I'm hearing a lot today about how incredibly important that is, because you want to sort of keep what you create, or at least ethically be able to say, if someone says, let me know about your data set, let me know about your prompts, which is what I've heard Steam has been asking developers as well. Then you're able to say, this is exactly where it is. And this is exactly where it has its best impact. So you're ethical and you're successful if it works out, right?
I hope so. I think, there is a gray area that all of this stuff exists in. We are using GPT as a language model, and GPT is trained on a big, publicly accessible, but not open source data set. So, we're using that, but we're not saying, write me a story in the style of George R.R. Martin. We are saying, here are lots of examples of how it should sound. So hopefully we're avoiding, yes, there's a grey area around who owns the IP. Are ChatGPT infringing IP? I don't think we're infringing IP because we are not outputting anything that would be recognisably in anyone else's style. But I think a lot of these issues are going to need to be worked out over the next few years. We exist in this slightly strange space, and our approach has just been to try to be the good guys. We're aware that some people's noses will be put out of joint. Like, as I said in the talk, in 1982, people tried to ban synthesizers and sequencers. And my career would never have happened without synthesizers and sequencers, because I'm not very good at playing the piano, but I can do this nice and slowly and build a tune that way. So, this technology is going to change a lot of things. But as with our deal with our voice artist, where we created the AI voice and then gave it to him, we don't own it. We said to him, it's important that you own that. You license it back to us for a fee. But you want to go and license that to Activision. You want to go and do this. You want to do that. It's fine. So it's kind of trying to put the controls back in the hands of the people that deserve them, and kind of, as someone that creates content myself, I don't want to be the bad guy, kind of, being the tech bro at the top of the pile, stealing everyone's IP from them.
You are giving the IP owners back what you create and saying, here it is. I've got your great voice, maybe with a Yorkshire accent. I don't know. I heard about that one. And you have it, and then we'll license it back from you. That's a very interesting model. Is that unique to you, or is it simply because you feel you have to give back where you get your inspiration from?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's about a year ago we did this deal with Tom. And so it's before any of the kind of actors' strikes and the writers' strikes that brought AI and possible bad sides of AI to people's attention more. And I think what we came up with, I mean, I don't think it was because of us, but it certainly seems to be the kind of deal that the unions are thinking is a much more reasonable one. Because you can understand it. The example I drew was the parallel with taxi drivers in London. Taxi drivers in London have been kind of usurped by GPS technology. And you don't want that to happen to people that are creators. So, we want to be able to make sure that people can continue to, make a living, profit from those things, but also to do things that we couldn't do before. That's the most exciting thing about AI. It's not about, can I do the voice for my game much cheaper than before? It's more about, well, never could I make a voice for every single player every single day before, but all of a sudden I can. So it's trying to navigate that in a way that's going to work for everybody.
And what's the player experience like? Because I understand that the game is not yet released. You're working on it, but it's going to be very interesting from the aspect that I can co-create my experience with my community. So in a sense, I am director as well as participant.
Yeah, so we want to create a whole kind of creative ecosystem of players. So we're creating these objects, these dice and these figures and these worlds, and we're making games to play in those. But we would love to get to the point where other people are making games in those too. It's kind of like modding, but going a lot further. So you could do anything from, you might just want to decorate your character to make it look the way you want it to look. Or you might want to curate your world and run a tournament inside that world and invite your friends and they can win this piece of loot that you put in there. Or you might want to go ahead and build your whole game for yourself. And I think if you can create that kind of ecosystem, like happened with Dungeons and Dragons until Hasbro kind of upset the community a little bit a couple of years ago. But, that thing where it's more than a game, it's a hobby. And some people who want to create in those ecosystems are empowered to, and some of them might even, might make a living in it. They might just be doing it for fun, but that's kind of what we're all about. So it's not really about one game, although the first game we're making called Beneath the Six is super cool. It's like a turn-based roguelike multiplayer dungeon adventure. But it's about much more than that.
But at the end of the day, gaming is a business. Give me a little bit of a peek into how you see it as the ways that you could be monetizing this, the options, the platforms even. Is it a Steam? Is it an Epic? Is it all of the above? Is it console? Is it mobile? There's so much there to unpack. What direction are you thinking?
Eventually, I'd love it to be all of those. So the way that we imagine that we'll be monetizing this is you'll buy dice and you use the dice to create the characters. You probably will pay something in order to create a character that is sort of more tangible and long-lasting. If you want to, you can play with a character for nothing. But if you want that character to develop and to learn, that costs us money. So there needs to be some kind of revenue model associated with that. Similarly with the worlds, if you own a world, maybe we're selling things for you to put in that world. So I think the more important thing is are people enjoying playing it? If people like it and they come back and you can nurture that ecosystem of creation and fun and everyone kind of collaborating in a hobby, then we can make money out of it. But all of it starts with a good game. And, that's what we're sort of heads down building. So hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe towards the end of this year, we'll be showing people something that is, tangibly a good game.
I'll tell you what, Harry, without knowing it, right, you just came up with the name for the model, because when you said that, I thought, pay to learn.
Pay to learn. I'll get my trademark lawyer on it as quickly as possible. Yeah.
This was about voice. This was about narrative. This was about character. Where can you imagine taking this?
For us, the vision is just these huge worlds that become more and more personal to you. So it means something. Your characters mean something to you. You kind of collect characters in this game by combining different dice together to make different characters, and they'll go on different adventures. I love the idea that you could just drag 4 of those, sit them around a fire, and they'll start talking to each other. They'll start telling you the story. Oh, did I ever tell you about the time when I slayed this dragon? And this, that's when these things are genuinely becoming more interesting and more intelligent than we created them. I think that's where this stuff is super exciting. So we see this kind of world where you genuinely start caring about places and people because they are becoming more and more real and more kind of human-like over time.
And because it's also more genuine, it starts to feel like, yeah, to your point about the play to learn, I enjoy it then. I am learning, and it's a great experience. And it was a great interview, Harry. May I?
Thank
Great
you so
to
much.
have you. This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Anne Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.